Assistant Chief Scott Dingee with JSO's Investigation Division. Approximately 4:41 this evening, the comm center at JSO, the 911 center, received two separate calls in reference to hit-and-run incidents in the 12,000 block of Nesting Eagles Way. Approximately a minute later, the comm center also got a third 911 call in reference to a mentally ill individual who was posing a threat to a relative of that person. That was in the 1300 block of Blue Eagle Way East, which is close to Nesting Eagles Way. From the description of the vehicles in the hit and run, as well as the information in reference to the mentally ill person, officers who were on duty at the time over the radio heard that information and recognized that to be an individual that they were familiar with, that they had had interactions with before in the past, and they knew to have mental illness issues. So officers were dispatched and began to head towards the scenes nearby here. At approximately 4:47 p.m., we received a fourth 911 call in reference to a reckless vehicle that had crashed, possibly with injuries, on the Wonderwood Expressway at the top of the ICW bridge. Officers again recognized the description of that vehicle as being the same, possibly being the same vehicle involved in the previous three incidents. So officers immediately headed in that direction as well. A grand total of 4 officers and 2 sergeants immediately began heading in that direction towards the ICW bridge there. When the officers arrived, there were several vehicles present, stopped in the roadway. One was a gray Ford Explorer that had rear-ended a red vehicle, a red SUV. The gray Ford Explorer was occupied by Stephen Smith, white male, age 32. When the officers arrived, they observed 2 civilians who were attempting to help Mr. Smith, who was still seated in the vehicle in his Ford Explorer. According to those witnesses, Mr. Smith was alert but was non-responsive. They said he, quote, looked out of it. He was staring straight ahead, would not respond to their attempts to help him. The vehicle was obviously damaged and had extensive damage from driving on a rim, striking other objects, as well as the vehicle that it eventually crashed into. The officers then had the civilians move out of the way back to an area of safety, and they began to issue loud verbal commands to that driver, Mr. Smith, to exit his vehicle. This went on for several minutes. At approximately 5:14 p.m., Mr. Smith did exit his vehicle. He was armed with a small handgun. He then began to approach the officers in the direction of the officers and the civilians that were in behind him. At some point during that interaction, Sergeant A. Will, W-I-L-L, a 9-year veteran, fired his JSO-issued 9mm handgun twice at Mr. Smith, striking him both times. At that time, we had already had rescue units staged nearby. So immediately after the shootings, the rescue personnel were able to come to the scene and render first aid. They transported Mr. Smith to a nearby hospital where he underwent surgery. He is in intensive care but is expected to survive. A firearm was recovered at the scene of this incident, and potential charges are still being evaluated at this time as to what we're going to do going forward. We're going to have another press conference at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning where I'll be able to provide you more information as far as charges and backstory as to the previous interactions that officers had had with him and other information that might be helpful to understand what happened today. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Chief, are there any dash cam videos available?
From the officers, there is no body camera or dash cam video that we are aware of. None of the officers had issued body cameras. It is our understanding that Mr. Smith, in past interactions with the police, he has his own dash cam, has had that in the past, so that's something that we're going to investigate, but that has not been confirmed as of now.
What led him to the decision to shoot the video? Was he pointing a gun at the officers, or just approaching them in kind of a threatening manner? How was that?
Yeah, that's all still under investigation, the specifics of it. We've interviewed a total of 5 witness officers and 5 civilians and 1 rescue people, all that saw what had occurred. So we're still getting all those details. Obviously that takes time to interview and speak with that many people. But from all accounts that we've had so far, he did exit the vehicle with a gun in his hand and advance toward the officers. So I'll be able to hopefully provide more details tomorrow.
But we don't know if he was pointing the gun at them. Yeah, we don't know.
Not specifically right now, no.
Where was he struck?
He was struck one time in the chest area and one time in the arm.
Only 1 officer fired?
Correct.
What was his name again?
It's Sergeant A. Will, W-I-L-L.
Any other questions?
This was twice. We heard 3 times it was twice. The gun was fired and it struck him twice.
Yeah, the sergeant fired 2 times and the subject was hit both times.
When will the bridge be open again?
It should be opening very shortly.
So you all, both lanes?
Yes, both lanes. Yeah.
You all have been dealing with Mr. Smith throughout the day, I guess with several calls throughout this afternoon, you say?
No, they have dealt with him multiple times in the past, and we'll be able to give you all that information tomorrow with specifics as to past incidents. Today, that first call at 4:41 was the first time anything today.
I understand he struck a bunch of mailboxes, light posts, stuff like that as he was going through the suburban neighborhood and the streets you mentioned.
Correct. The original calls had to do with that. One of the residents in that neighborhood, we're still interviewing him, but the information that he relayed initially was that Mr. Smith nearly struck him. Did strike a mailbox, did strike a pole, some trees in the area. So he was driving in a reckless manner.
Any idea what might have set him off?
Again, that's still under investigation. We have spoken to his wife, and we're getting that background information. I should be able to provide more on that tomorrow.
Does he have children?
I can't. I don't know.
And what was his condition again?
He is in non-life-threatening condition. He's obviously in serious. He's in intensive care, but believed to be in non-life-threatening condition.
And that vehicle was a gray Ford Explorer?
Correct. And his name is Stephen Smith, white male, age 32.
Common spelling?
Yes, ma'am.
S-T-E-V-E-N?
As far as I understand, yes.
You said he crashed on the bridge. You said he hit another red car, just rear-ended it?
Yeah, so what the civilian up there told us, the lady that was driving the red car, she was actually driving behind, she ended up coming up behind Mr. Smith on the ICW bridge. He was still driving with a flat tire on the rim, vehicle damaged. She observed him. He then struck the wall of the bridge a couple of times, which she observed, and then came to a stop. She is a trained EMT, so she pulled over in front of him and then got out of her vehicle to come check on him, see if she could render aid. At that point, Mr. Smith then accelerated into her parked vehicle, and then she again attempted to render aid and contact him at his car.
She wasn't hurt?
She was out of the car and was not hurt.
No officers?
No officers were injured, no civilians were injured, thankfully.
So through all these experiences, even through the neighborhood and hitting the mailboxes and everything, the only person hurt is him?
Luckily so, that no other civilians, no other personnel were hurt. Mr. Smith is the only one with injuries.
This family member that he was, I guess he was involved with earlier in the day, you know what the situation was now? Is that a woman or a man who lived in that neighborhood?
Again, that's something I'll get into more detail tomorrow as we flesh all that out.
Dealing with people...
I don't offhand know.
Dealing with people with mental illnesses and situations like this, can you just go over, like, in those split seconds, what is that like for officers, since they have had previous dealings with this particular man?
So that it's always challenging when you're dealing with people that are suffering from mental illness. You can't always determine what their thought process is and whether they understand what's going on. So it's very difficult for officers to judge what a person would do. We have had quite a bit of training. We're actually sending all our officers currently through an additional training course in reference to dealing with mentally ill individuals. So it's something that we train to, but it is very difficult, and you just can't predict how things are going to go.
On that point, do officers or does dispatch have like a warning that comes up when they're dealing with a certain person like Mr. Smith that he has mental illness in the past?
There is a system in our comm center for designating certain either residences or locations as potentially officer safety issues. I do not know if his house was marked that way. What I do know, the officers that responded out tonight had at least one of them had firsthand experience with him and recognized him as a person that had past mental health issues.
So they knew who they were dealing with going in.
At least one of the officers, correct.
Mr. Smith had a valid driver's license?
That I don't know. I can get you that tomorrow.
Okay, what about the firearm? How did he obtain the firearm?
And that I don't know yet either. That's we're still looking at.
And your past dealings with him, was he known to be dangerous or hostile?
Again, I'll get you all those details tomorrow as we flesh that out.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.